Hey everybody, it's Tracy, and if you're like me, you get a ton of emails, unsolicited or solicited emails from people, firms trying to sell you some element of Comoros financial services, right? And first of all, find it, right, on a map, which, that's interesting. It's an endeavor. But the question is, because it's so cheap, is it worth it, right? And like you have three main licenses there that they authorize: banking, gaming, and financial services forex. It's really just forex and CFDs, binaries. And so, you know, the question and the purpose of this video, and I'll do a series, right? And we'll start with gaming, iGaming, and then get into banking and forex, CFDs. But the question is, is the juice worth the squeeze, right? And starting with iGaming, the answer is probably, right? The license itself, right, and this will go, be the same for even banking. It's relatively easy to get, right? Like, I mean, it's really sort of a light process that can be accomplished in almost under 2 months, right? The typical information is required, but even, from the business plan perspective, there's like a limit on how many pages it should be. So, you get into these business plans like we do, and it's like we submit it, they're like 50 pages long. Well, no, they want one that's no longer than 12, right? It's like they don't want to read. Fine with me, right? It makes it easier. And, there's no audit requirement. There's a local nominee requirement, but it's very inexpensive. There's baseline KYC, AML about, the UBOs, officers, directors, a very basic incorporation. And you're basically off and running, right? And, you will compare it to like an Isle of Man, right? Because it is a license, right? Okay, we're both licensed, right? You compare it to Costa Rica, Costa Rica's kind of a license, but not really, but sort of. And is it better, right? I don't know. And the reason is because with Comoros, right, it's so isolated. It's isolated not only in the sense like geographically, but its financial system and its financial framework is very just archaic and it's not developed. And the license itself, while I see, pretend that it's sort of gaining wider acceptance, isn't optically as pleasing to the FIs that you have to, financial institutions that you have to connect with, right? So, if you want to take debit card, right, the number of providers that are going to offer that payment rail for customer deposits is going to be a much smaller set than if you got the license in Isle of Man, right, or Curacao, possibly even Costa Rica. I don't know, right? But it's not a lot because, again, it's higher risk, right? And not only will those payment rail providers be fewer in number, they're going to assess a higher rate because of the perceived risk. And you could be the most legitimate operator in the world. They just don't care because it's Comoros, right? But for what you put in, okay, there's some optically pleasing elements of it. A player sees it, though. They are regulated by somebody. And if you really get into the regulation in Comoros regarding iGaming, there is actually a lot of oversight in the sense that there's these ongoing reporting requirements. You have to have a nominated compliance officer director, and that person has these sort of regular, obligations to report back to the Financial Services Authority. So it's not this Wild West, but it's also not like Malta, right? And the penalties for not compliant, non-compliance is amorphous or non-existent. So, if you had something new, and like the iGaming license is very broad, lottery, sports, whatever you want, you wanted to prove out a concept, it's not the worst idea in the world, because you could get those FIs. You could build a brand, right? And you could get reliable enough FIs that wouldn't lead to a situation where a player couldn't get a redemption in time, or a software provider, failed to credit an account, something like that, which, as you know, if you're in the industry, some guy, it's 50, it's always the guy with $50 who goes on the message boards and like your whole site's tanked, right? Before it even gets off the ground. So you can find the reliable enough partners at a higher cost, but I think long-term you don't stay there, because I think you reach critical mass and the investment always justifies, a more optically pleasing license. And I'd say the same thing for like Isle of Man or even Curacao at this point, right? Like you're not going to stay there forever. You're going to get a license somewhere else as you get big and you can justify the investment. But that's sort of the nuance to it, and it's really easy. It's really cost effective, and it is a license, right? And you can get the partners, but it comes at this sort of cost, right? So as like sort of this, test tube incubator phase, I think it's actually not the worst idea. If you are operating in some kind of unregulated space and then, had a good following and then moved to Comoros, would it make sense? No, it wouldn't, right? Because you have to always have the FIs working, else you wouldn't be working. Now, if you're just doing a straight crypto-based platform, it's perfect because nobody cares, right? Like, and you don't really need, a lot of FIs, maybe one, and they're easy to find in the high risk categories, right? And you're just dealing in crypto, especially if the payouts are coming in crypto. So, that's my thought on it. And it's very enticing when you see the cost, but you also have to weigh that with your ability to operate and then how you compete with other licensed operations based on your margins and also just the optics of being licensed somewhere else, right? So that's Comoros iGaming. In a later video, I'll hit up on banking, Forex licenses, talk about those, and we can make some decisions. But definitely hit me up if you have any questions. Adam@adamtracy.io. Be sure you like my page, and I will talk to you next time. Cheers.